On today's episode of the Luke Loses podcast, Being Vulnerable with Joe Boland, we hit a ton of topics, including binge eating, masculinity, everything in between, and it all leads back to being vulnerable. I hope you enjoy it. What's up, losers? I am Luke, and this is Luke Loses. Now, here at the Luke Loses podcast, being a loser, that's a good thing because we're losing the weight, we're losing the unhealthy lifestyle, and we're losing that negative image we have for ourselves. Please remember that I have no fitness or nutrition education. Everything I talk about is from asking questions, searching the internet, and my own personal experiences. Please check out www.lukelosespodcast.com. That's got my social media as well as other platforms where you can listen to this podcast. You can send me a direct message off of the website, or you can call the loser line, which is 323-920-LUKE or 5853. Send me a text, send me a message, or call that number. Tell me what's on your mind, what you think of the episode, what you'd like to hear on a future episode. I'd love to hear from you. Let's just jump right into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And if you are new, welcome. If you are not new, welcome back. I appreciate all of you being here. If you missed last week's episode, I released, it's called Anxiety Sucks. And I talk about the hard time that I've been going through. I'm doing much better this week. I'm on a high. For those of you that have reached out to me to talk to me, thank you for checking in on me. I am doing good. You all are amazing. Thank you again. Also, if you stick around at the end of this episode, I have 3 voicemails that I'm going to be playing. One of them is a little bit older. I couldn't figure out how to get it on my computer and how to get it on the podcast, but I've got it figured out. So I've got 3 voicemails. Stick around for them. As for today's episode, I talked to Joe Boland. He is an awesome guy. I met him a couple months back, and we've talked on and off. Finally been able to make it happen where we get him on here and we have a conversation. Now, the conversation does go all over the place, but it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I hope he enjoyed it. So that's that. Let's just jump right into it. All right, so today I am joined by Joe Boland. I met him on one of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of. It's the men's weight loss support group. And in that group, there is a section for trusted trainers. So it's where the trainers that aren't pushy, that aren't in it for the money, that aren't in your inbox constantly saying, hey, hire me and I can change your life immediately. Joe is one of those guys. Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, Luke, thanks for having me on. So as you mentioned, my name's Joe. I work as a part-time health and life coach. I also am a busy professional. We see that term used a lot out in the wild in terms of coaches promising to help busy professionals. And I am fortunate enough, I suppose, to be one of those. I primarily work with desk jockeys, people who are looking to balance their work commitments, their career advancement, etc., with wanting to be healthy, wanting to be happy, wanting to be able to show up in their family lives the way they want to. And that's really become one of my passions over the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years.
What actually got you into it? Why did you decide to go the route of fitness and personal health?
That's a bit of an onion in terms of the layers to it. The first thing that comes to mind is that I lost my own dad when I was still in high school, and he died of what doctors commonly refer to as a lifestyle disease or lifestyle illness. And so a lot of that was, he wasn't very good at expressing his emotions. He wasn't good at getting in touch with his non-masculine side. He was very much the typical alpha male that we all know. Raised on Clint Eastwood movies and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so instead of reaching out to others and finding healthy ways of expressing his challenges or whatever he was going through, he fell into those habits that many of us on this journey are trying to shake, whether that's, eating to excess, or it's drinking, or it's smoking, or any number of things that we look to as coping mechanisms for areas in our life where we aren't really in alignment with where we'd like to be. So that's the first layer of how I got started on this. Fast forward maybe 10 years or so, and I actually found myself working an office job. And despite that, I had fallen into my own habits of having a busy career, working late nights, and despite how well I was doing career-wise, my life from a health and fitness perspective was in a total downward spiral. I was one of those people who was working until 8 and 9 o'clock at night, getting big projects done, getting pats on the back from executives and upper management and everything else. I felt like my career was headed in a great direction. But by the time I left the office, I was so exhausted. It was like, you know what, let's hit up the drive-through. We're getting 2 Big Mac meals and heading home. And I think that a lot of people can resonate, I think, with that level of burnout when you are in, a high stress and kind of a fairly demanding work atmosphere, whether it's, expectations others are placing on you, or even expectations you're placing on yourself. So that's really where I kind of had this come to Jesus moment, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it was when our elevator in the office was actually out of order. And I had a presentation for a project initiative that I was working on, and it was a floor up from where I typically worked. And so I had to take the stairs. And I got to the top of the flight of stairs, and I was actually winded. And I noticed that the button-down shirt that I was wearing, I actually had like the pit stains developing in it from sweating just from climbing the flight of stairs. And I went into that boardroom and I delivered what had to have been the least confident presentation I could possibly have delivered, because all I was aware of was the amount of huffing through my mouth I was doing and the dampness collecting on my shirt. And so after that, it really led to a lot of reflection in terms of like, how am I going to build a career? What is my life going to look like 10 years from now? How is this affecting my ability to show up authentically in the way that I would like to show up in both my professional life and in my personal life? Because in my personal life, as a mirror of that, I had people who had stopped inviting me out to things because they knew I wasn't physically capable of doing it, and they wanted to spare me the awkwardness of it. And so they would go out for hikes, or they would be going out kayaking, or they'd be going out to play hockey, all of these things that I really enjoyed doing in my younger years, but I couldn't keep up with them anymore. They knew it. They knew that I knew it. And so it was kind of this unspoken, well, we'll invite him out to the bar or out to any kind of sit down events, but we'll spare him the shame and awkwardness of having to say no to these other things that he can't do. And I'll admit I'm getting a little emotional even talking about it right now as I reflect back on it. But that feeling of actually being barred off from areas of your life that you know that you would enjoy and you would derive great pleasure in because of the choices that you're currently making in some areas of your life, or areas where you've fallen out of alignment with who you want to be. That was what led me down this path of wanting to pursue my own weight loss. And once I reached a point where I was very happy with myself, physically, emotionally, and more or less in every area of my life, that's when I turned to coaching. And I should probably at this point triple underline as well that just because I'm a coach doesn't mean I have it all together every hour of every day. None of us do. But one of the things that you recognize as a coach, and you can really, it becomes your superpower when you're helping other people, is an understanding of the challenges that they're going through, and being able to not prescript how you would go through that or how you would resolve that challenge, but rather serving as a mirror to help them walk and talk themselves through whatever the challenge is that they're going through. That's the most important part of being a coach, in my opinion.
Yeah, you mentioned the not getting invited to certain things. And in my experience, I cut myself out from my friends because that was a fear. I didn't want to be, oh, well, we shouldn't have Luke come because he can't do this. So I would, any chance I got, I would be like, well, I can't come tonight. I can't be there. I can't make it. I can't do this. And then eventually they just stopped inviting me to things because of that. And that's a painful thing to go through, trying to cut yourself out of things that you love doing because fear.
It is a hard one for sure. And they didn't say it at the time. It wasn't until after I lost the weight that they came back and said, you know what, we're so happy that you can come and join us and do these things. We had stopped inviting you. So the admission came well after the, the situation. And so it felt almost bittersweet in a way, where it's like, oh, cool, I can do this stuff now. But as you said, I had also taken the steps of coming up with reasons or excuses or just ways that I could avoid and bow out of things or decline or whatever else, and eventually they saw it for what it was. That's what they ended up telling me was, after you declined enough times and we saw that you were kind of cherry picking the things that you wanted to join us in doing, we said, okay, well, we'll spare him having to say no to these ones and we'll just invite him to these ones.
Right. So I did an episode a couple of weeks ago where I mentioned how I am with social media and how deep I was with worrying about the celebrities in their life and why can't I be like that. And you and I spoke a little bit via text message. We kind of really connected with that. Like, I know you had mentioned that you related to that a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about how social media can tear up what we have going for us.
So social media, in my opinion, it's like this weird drug where we get this initial hit of inspiration or motivation because some of these posts, you have guys like The Rock or Sylvester Stallone, even at the age that he's at, he looks fantastic. All of these guys who we grew up with, we kind of idolized. We used to have posters in our bedroom of them and all these other things. And we fall in love with this small glimmer of what our life could maybe be like. And so what it ends up being is it ends up being this dream that we have a honeymoon period with. We mislabel that honeymoon period as motivation. And the thing is that, like any other relationship, you've got the honeymoon period, you've got the first kiss, you've got the butterflies in the stomach and everything else. And then as things kind of settle, it's like, okay, this is now where the real work begins. And so just like a traditional relationship with a partner or a spouse, you'll have those moments, those small moments where those butterflies come up again and everything else. But it ends up being a relationship that you do have to put mindful work and effort into. Even the best relationships require that. It's just that the best relationships are worth doing the work.
Yeah. You mentioned about your dad and how the manly man and we're not supposed to share emotion and stuff. And I feel it's starting to become easier for us men to be able to show emotion and be us instead of trying to portray this big, bad, tough man that can't hurt my feelings or anything. And I, like you mentioned with like Sylvester Stallone and all the celebrities on there, a lot of the guys are making it easier for us, which is nice. But then you still have a lot of the other people that portray men as big and bad, and you can't cry, you can't feel bad, and there's nothing wrong with us. Like we have to we can't show anything wrong with us.
Absolutely. It's funny because as you say that, the first thing that comes to mind are the old like Bugs Bunny style cartoons, right? Where it's like you would have, there'd be a hole in the boat. And so they would plug it with a finger, and sure enough, another hole would pop out. And the next thing you know, they're trying to plug all these holes. And that's exactly what the human psyche does with things like anxiety and depression and these myriad psychological factors. It's like the more you try to plug that hole with not talking about it and keeping a stiff upper lip and being a man and not crying and all these other things, those holes just start popping up in other areas of your life. And that was something that I spoke briefly to earlier in terms of these quote unquote lifestyle diseases. Really what they are is they're coping mechanisms. They are ways of us kind of letting out all of those things that we aren't actually expressing and we aren't actually getting off our chest in healthy and productive ways, because we've been conditioned from a very young age not to do that. That's actually an inherently bad thing to do.
Now you're talking about like the coping mechanisms, and I know you and I spoke before about you used to binge eat, correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, how did you realize that that was an issue? What did you do to work on curbing that?
Good question. I think that one I might have to think a little about, admittedly. Like, I don't have an off-the-cuff answer, which are the best kinds of questions, mind you. I think the awareness came from being in the moment and recognizing my behavior for what it was. So things like realizing that I would be sitting on the couch uncomfortably full, and I would still be reaching for another handful of chips, or I would still be reaching for another couple of Oreos, or and it almost becomes mechanical, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where it's almost like you're sitting there and you're now a spectator to what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain it.
Yeah, and so for me, it was just this moment myself, like, what the hell are you doing right now? And mind you, that didn't stop it. Like, I didn't stop the behavior in its tracks. It actually was this, I want off this ride. And the ride kept going, even though, it's like that kid screaming on a roller coaster that they want the roller coaster to stop, but the roller coaster can't stop until it runs its course. And so I ended up proverbially letting that roller coaster run its course. And the next day I really reflected on what that was like. I actually took an inventory of everything going on that led up to that, because I've realized that oftentimes our behavior or what we end up doing is either a symptom or an end result of something else that's going on. And so the sooner we can stop looking at what we're doing as these fundamentally bad or immoral decisions that we're making, the sooner we can actually work on doing something to resolve whatever the root issue is. Like, you and I have both spoken, as one binge eater to another, it's not a choice. We don't like having stomach aches, believe it or not. We don't enjoy the feeling of being totally out of control that comes with having those those drives and compulsions toward binge eating. And the interesting thing is that I will add, after I lost the weight, that was something I continued to struggle with, very much so. A part of diet culture and kind of these terms you see thrown around, I swept it under the rug by calling it a cheat day. And so what I started doing was I actually started giving myself a hall pass on this unhealthy behavior by saying, oh, it's okay. All of these people do it all the time. Going back to The Rock every Sunday posts photos of his cheat meals.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this isn't a binge, it's a cheat day. And that's what I started telling myself, to give myself permission to do it and to alleviate some of that guilt and some of that shame around it. I told myself it's just part of the process. They've even got a label for it. So it can't be a bad thing, right? It took a lot of inner work to realize that no, it's still not a healthy behavior. Even if you are quote unquote healthy, looking, you can still have plenty of unhealthy behaviors in your life. One of which was definitely the binging, or cheating, as I called it at that point. A lot of mindset work went into realizing that that was a dynamic that I really had to get myself out of. And that led me to looking at my career, my relationships, the people that I was associating with most frequently. What does my stress routine look like in terms of, addressing and resolving stress in my life? Do I have a mindfulness practice? All of these things that, frankly, in my opinion, far too readily get waved off in favor of, hey, let's all just buy food scales and get my fitness pal accounts. And that's going to fix it. And someday we're going to wake up and we're going to be healthy and we're going to have our shit together. And I'm here to tell you, and I have the battle scars to prove it, that's not how it works. You don't wake up one day 180 pounds with your shit together with a completely healthy mindset and everything else. It is kind of a whole life makeover. And that doesn't mean that you have to overhaul your life and completely upend everything. But you do have to look at every sphere of your life and recognize small contributors and small factors that play into this being the end result, where all of these seemingly inconsequential things in all these areas of your life end up building up to that moment where I'm at the grocery store and I've got a shopping list, and before I know it, I'm in the snack aisle and the cart's getting loaded up.
Yep.
And I'm not even home yet, but I already know, the road that the car is headed down at that point. And it's about walking your way back, backwards from that point that you're at and saying, okay, what are all of the seemingly insignificant, inconsequential areas of my life that contributed to this being what my Friday night is going to be?
Yeah. I do want to go back a little bit on this and talk about when you called it a cheat day instead of like binge eating. I would do stuff similar to that, but in my mind, I would know I shouldn't be doing this, but it's so easy to continue doing it. And that's like when I'm binging, like when you mentioned reach for more chips or reach for more Oreos. For me, when I'm doing it, I'm like, you feel like crap. You need to stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, you're doing it. You need to stop, spit it out. But I kept going. It is insane how much that food can control you, like how you feel in your mind and how you think. It's insane. That's the easiest way to put it. It's insane.
Absolutely, it is. And it also doesn't help, and I tell clients this, but it doesn't help that somebody out there is frankly being paid a boatload of money to engineer that food to taste the way it does so that you keep reaching back into that bag again and again until it's gone and you go to the store and buy another. It is a reality where it's not, part of it is, as mentioned, those various stressors and underlying issues in our lives that we do need to identify and work to resolve. But it doesn't help that it's actually exacerbated by these companies that actually have teams of scientists whose sole mandate is to engineer food to be as hyper palatable as possible, which is the word for it, is hyper palatability. And so it's everything from how much salt is in this, how much sugar is in it, how much fat is in it, what is the mouthfeel of it, does it dissolve, how long does it take to dissolve in the mouth? I mean, there are so many factors and criteria. I can't remember what book I read this in, but they were talking about the bliss point of food, which is scientifically that exact point that will drive you to keep eating it. Even well after you're full, well after you don't want any more, you just continue eating it anyway.
I did an episode actually, and I talked a little bit about doing this podcast, it's opened my eyes up to looking into things. And when I did the research for that episode, like you said, the scientists that are there to make food addictive, you mentioned like the dissolving and like the crunch of potato chips that's made to block you from realizing what you're doing. It blows your mind when you actually look into it. And it's, again, it's insane. It's crazy to think that that's normal. And that they, like you said, they have a team of people whose job is to, what can we do to make this. I tried to explain it to my wife yesterday. Actually, we were talking about how like a McDonald's burger tastes the same every bite. You're not going to take a bite here and it's going to taste different over here, like normal food, like food that you make would be. As you're chewing, you're mixing flavors and creating new flavors. But with the fast food cheeseburger, every bite tastes the same, and that's made to where you eat it fast and you eat more of it.
Absolutely. And there are other factors too beyond flavor. One of them is when you take a look at the packaging for a lot of fast food companies, particularly around breakfast time, it is engineered with the idea in mind that you're going to be eating it with one hand and driving with the other. So they actually cater to the time of day and the behavior that, your behavior patterns. And it's like, how can we facilitate you eating our food? So we're going to take a look at what your morning routine looks like, and we're actually going to design kind of the common sense choice, for lack of a better way of putting it. If I have to drive somewhere and I need to grab something on the go, I know that an Egg McMuffin and one of your hash browns come in those handy little packages that keep me from getting the grease on my hands and everything else, and I can eat it with one hand and drive with the other. And that's it. That's money in the bank.
Yeah. Wow. I never really thought of that. Now, I did talk about before colors and music, and there was one, they did a test where in this liquor store, this grocery store, they played French music and German music. And on the days that they played French music, more French wine was sold. And on days that they played German music, more German wine was sold. I didn't realize I could be that manipulated that easily. And even talking about social media, going back to that, I watched the documentary, The Social Dilemma. It was on Netflix. I don't know if you haven't seen that, check it out. It shows you how they use yourself to manipulate you into doing whatever they want you to do. It's scary.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? When you look at social media, the goal isn't to get you to engage with things that are positive and things that help you and things that inspire you and motivate you in beneficial ways. The goal is simply to get you to engage with stuff, whether that's stuff that makes you happy, or it's stuff that makes you miserable, or stuff that makes you angry. The goal is just engagement. And so that's why for a lot of my clients, one of our first orders of business is a social media detox. It's okay. I want you to be mindful of how you're interacting on social media, the accounts that you follow, the things you're commenting on, because a lot of people think that they're somehow doing a service when they comment on something they disagree with. And it's like, no, in fact, what you're doing is reinforcing to the software and the algorithms running in the background that it should show you more of this, because this is something that you're actually engaged with. And so by saying, I oppose this, I hate this, I never want to see it again, the software in the background is just going to double down on showing that to you because that's the one thing that you did click on.
Yeah.
And so when you're mindful and intentional in the accounts that you follow and the things that you comment on, you actually can curate a much more positive, a much more uplifting, and a much more inspiring experience for yourself on social media, which I think all of us need in this day and age, especially as we go on this journey. You don't want to be, as you said, you don't want to be surrounded by the unhealthy alpha male personas who are barking at you about willpower and discipline, and how if you can't quote unquote man up and drag your ass to the gym at 5 a.m. every day, which frankly not everybody wants to do, and that is totally fine, but somehow it makes you less of a man, it makes you less valuable, it makes you less of a human being. I've seen some of these accounts go so far as to talk about how obesity is a choice. Yeah. Now, having spent most of my adult life obese, I assure you that's not a choice. It's not something that I woke up every day excited about.
Right.
And so for us to be able to carefully and mindfully curate our interactions online to put us more in alignment with who we are authentically, who we really and truly want to be, and get out of making this whole weight loss thing a competitive sport, which unfortunately it largely is. I think the more benefit and the more progress and the more success people do experience.
Yeah. You mentioned the people that say obesity is a choice. I actually saw one the other day. There was a guy that he's a trainer or whatever, he's a big buff dude. And he said, when he sees somebody going into a Krispy Kreme that's obese, it pisses him off. Krispy Kreme, for those that don't know, is the donut shop. So if somebody goes in to buy a donut, it pisses him off. And then he goes on to say, well, if I see you at the gym, I'm cheering you on, I'm happy for you. Somebody that I follow, Duetted or whatever the thing is on TikTok, and she mentioned that, why does it matter what anybody does? Why does that, somebody eating a donut, why is that going to affect your mood? How are you going to allow that to just ruin your day because you see somebody that you think shouldn't be eating a donut? Going back to that, surround yourself with positivity. That's what I did. I did a cleanse on my Instagram, tried to get rid of anything, and the best way to explain it is if like you've got the body dysmorphia or, a huge body image issue, and you shouldn't surround yourself with swimsuit models because you're just going to chew yourself up because you don't look like that. In your mind, you don't think you're good enough to look like that. And that was one of my issues, is I would surround myself with these guys in these Speedos that, their arms are as big as my thighs and they're massive. They look amazing. But I was like, my wife would come in and see me scrolling through here and like looking at this dude doing bicep curls. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, man, I want to be that. I want that. And then subconsciously, my day's kind of shitty because I want that so bad and I don't look like that. It's insane what it can do to you. So that's one thing I recommend. Like you said, the cleanse. I did that a couple of years ago. I was off Facebook. It was different reasons. I had an ex that I want to cut ties with everything. So I deactivated my Facebook. And the first month was difficult. But after that, I felt great. Like I wasn't negative. My sister's like, did you see this on Facebook? No, I didn't. I'm not on Facebook, or, this and that. And it was a great feeling that I didn't have to deal with the drama, the negativity, the hatred. That's a great idea to cut out a lot of that.
Yeah. And an important distinction as well is that some of this stuff that can really impact us in a negative way isn't necessarily posted with any malicious or malevolent intent. In fact, some of the most damaging stuff is posted with the best of intentions. Like some of these celebrities and influencers, as you mentioned, sometimes what they do is they post what they really in their hearts believe to be motivating photos and motivating captions. And realistically, what is happening is they're presenting themselves as, a hero or a standard to which we should all be aspiring without necessarily meaning to do so. And I often see a lot of these trainers online getting swept up in the same thing, where what they're effectively prescribing and recommending to people aren't things that help those people live their best lives. They're things that help those people live that trainer's life. And so trainers and celebrities and people on social media shouldn't be trying to create clones of themselves. They should actually be empowering and uplifting people to live their best and most authentic lives as individuals.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about it now with like the clones and stuff. I've talked about before with another guy that he's a bigger guy, and he mentioned these trainers would say, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this to get fit. Well, when you're 500 pounds, you can't necessarily do this or do that they're able to do. And that's one thing that draws me to you. I know when we started talking, you were like, full disclosure, I'm a trainer, I'm a coach. And I was like, because you didn't force it down my throat, you didn't say, you're doing good, I can help you. I absolutely love that. And I try to bring on coaches and trainers that are in that realm. I talk about this a lot, but the fitness world and how a lot of it's a money-making business. Everybody wants to look better, lose weight, feel better, move better, all that. So it's easy to get in that. So off topic there, but thank you for not trying to shove that down my throat, trying to sell me something.
You're welcome. And maybe it's off topic and maybe it isn't, because one of the things that I love geeking out over actually is Joseph Campbell and the idea of the hero's journey, right? And that is a book that actually resonated very heavily with me over the course of my fitness journey and my weight loss journey. And I've read it countless times. And there is an idea of this monomyth. And for anybody who's not familiar with Joseph Campbell is kind of one of the early people kind of look at him as the best way I can put it is the godfather of storytelling, at least modern storytelling. So when you look at stories from Star Wars, the Star Wars saga, through to many of the comic movies that we love, many of them follow his monomyth, which is the idea that you have a hero and they experience some kind of hardship, and a guide comes along to help them build the skills or develop the how to end up defeating whatever the antagonist is in the story. So in the case of Star Wars, that would be either Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda in Return of the Jedi, right? And where some of the messaging with trainers, frankly, falls a little flat is they actually try to insert themselves as a hero who's going to rescue somebody else. And we are all actually heroes on our own journey. And so the second somebody comes in and they're not trying to help us through our own journey, but instead they're kind of coming in as the hero, looking to save the day and save us and everything else. The best way I can put it is that having somebody swoop in to try and save you actually knocks you out of the role of being the lead character in your own story. And I think that that's where a lot of people fundamentally bristle a little when meaning people come in. And it doesn't have to be like a coach or a trainer. It can be that overbearing parent, or it can be that micromanaging boss. All of these people who show up in areas of your world, the reason why we bristle on some level when they insert themselves in that role is because we all recognize ourselves as the protagonist in our own life. And this is now somebody who's coming in and vying for that role. So it ends up not really being helpful, not really being productive. And it actually is something that at a very core level, we push back against.
That makes a lot of sense. That's what I love doing these podcasts, because every guest that I speak to will say something and I'm like, man, that was me, or that is me, or that's what I want. So it's nice that I have this platform to do that. And I know we're all over the place. Sure. And I apologize.
That's okay.
Going back to binging, you mentioned that when the money was tight, you would unknowingly binge more. That is something that I did. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was actually one of the things that I uncovered, one of my behavior patterns. So earlier when I was talking about all of these different areas of our life that can result in binging behavior as a coping mechanism or a byproduct or an outcome, one of the behaviors that I identified in my own journey that led to my binging was my upbringing. So to be open and transparent for a minute here, my family wasn't a family of means by any stretch. And so there were often elements of food insecurity within our household in terms of what were we eating that day, how many meals would we get to eat that day, etc. And so one of the things that from a young age I picked up on was this idea that if we were out at a relative's house or I was at a friend's house or whatever else, it was this feast and famine kind of relationship that I had with food, where if I was out, I would eat as much as was kind of socially acceptable. I would eat being mindful of people around me. The second people started to side eye, then I would kind of dial it back and tone it down. But it was really about getting while the getting was good, because I didn't necessarily know going home again, didn't know what my eating schedule or whatever else, for lack of a better way of putting it, would look like after that. So it was kind of this better stock up mentality. And as I got older and I got my own job, despite having a successful career and a pantry that was constantly full and a fridge that was constantly full, it was as though on some level that behavior had been hardwired into me. And so I was still acting that way, but just more frequently. So, meals would routinely become these exercises in overeating, because on some psychological level, I was eating every meal as though it was my last meal. And I didn't know when I was going to eat again, despite the fact that the kitchen is adequately stocked and there's food in the house and everything else. Every meal was just the last meal. That was the behavior that had been kind of ingrained into me at that point. And so I did a lot of work actually with my wife on that, where when I got caught up in that pattern, she would actually, take my hand as I was holding my utensil. She would take my hand and she would be like, "There's plenty of food in the house, And it was just that quiet moment to recenter me and to ground me in, right, this isn't it. This isn't all there is. And that went a long, long way in terms of helping to get me out of that and helping to kind of rewire my brain to stop that cycle. And I can't speak enough about the importance of that level of vulnerability. And I feel like that's a through line that's been this entire conversation, is us talking about opening up about our problems and our anxieties. Had I adopted the typical man mindset of, well, I don't want to admit that I'm having a hard time with anything, she never would have known about that. I never would have had somebody partner with me to get me through that. And even now to this day, I probably would still be in that cycle of behavior.
Wow. That's really amazing that she was able to be there and do that with you. And I've talked about that plenty of times, that whoever you're with has to be on this journey with you and has to be able to help you along the way. Yeah, that's intense. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, thanks for giving me a space to share it.
And like I said, I know we've been all over the place. The vulnerability that does keep popping up. Is there anything that you want to touch on that we didn't jump on? This is your time to have at it.
My time to have at it. So I would say that based on my experience through my weight loss journey and even now, having kept the weight off for coming up on 10 years now, I've kept the weight off. And that's been through, frankly, a fairly messy divorce, 2 layoffs, a cross-country move. I've had pretty much all the shit that life can throw at you. One of the things that's really stuck with me is that this stuff doesn't have to be as hard as we make it out to be. I see this time and again in Facebook groups and online, where people figure that the more restrictive, the more rigid, the more inflexible of a framework they create, the more likely they are to be successful. The way I see it, if you build a structure that's rigid and inflexible and impenetrable, that sounds a lot like a prison. Let's call it what it is. You're building a prison for yourself. And most people aren't going to want to turn themselves in. If we have this idea that we need to totally overhaul our lives and change everything, and all of that in the name of health and wellness and fitness, it doesn't end up panning out in the long run. I've seen it, I've seen it 1,000 times over. I've experienced it. I've definitely failed more times on my journey than I can count. That's probably the most important takeaway from this, is this idea of don't overthink it, stick to the fundamentals, and also look for areas in your life that have unspoken but profound effects on the behaviors that you're trying to change.
I like it.
As you said, in the spirit of us hopping all over the place, actually, I want to go back to, these trainers who come in and they're like, oh, just do this and do that and do what I do. And people are like, dude, I'm 500 pounds. I have to take the bus to work both ways. I've got maybe an hour and a half of free time every day. And the story that came to mind actually was a buddy of mine bought a Jeep. Okay. And there's this interesting moment, I think, that we've all experienced or endured, where a friend of ours gets a new car, and suddenly that's the car they're pushing on absolutely everybody, whether or not it makes sense for their lifestyle. It's like, oh, dude, you've got to get a Jeep. It's going to change your life. Like, you would not believe what this thing can do. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, dude, the fuel economy is shit. I'm never going to be off-roading. Like this vehicle makes no sense for my lifestyle or the way I'm living. And he actually looked at me, and I, to this day, I don't know if he was serious or not, but he was like, well, then you're not living life right. And I'm kind of like, that's actually the underlying mentality that goes into a lot of the fitness messaging that we see, where it's kind of like, just do what I do, buy the Jeep, drive the Jeep. And, if the Jeep doesn't work for you, it's because you're not living life right.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that book, and it made me think of something that I think I want to start doing, is asking my guest for book recommendations or documentary recommendations, podcast recommendations, anything. What is something that you would recommend to the listeners of this show? It could be anything. It could be true crime. It could be a murder documentary. Whatever's on your mind. What would you recommend to our listeners?
So the first thing that comes to mind is the book Mastery by Robert Greene. And the premise of the book, without giving any big things away, no spoilers or anything, but the premise behind the book is that despite our day-to-day limitations and our day-to-day behaviors, oftentimes in key and crucial moments in our life, we will see these extraordinary exceptions to those behaviors. And we've heard them described as being in a flow state, or things just seem to happen and in a beneficial way. So the way we talked about binging earlier, it's the same kind of sense of this out-of-body experience, except you are doing something extraordinarily well. We've all caught glimpses of that in our lives, and Robert Greene refers to that as moments of mastery. one of the fundamental tenets in this book is he talks about how to tap into that and how to build a mindful practice that leads to us having those moments of mastery occur more frequently in our lives.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, Joe, as we're wrapping it up, where could the listeners go to find you? You have Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, whatever you got. Go ahead and share it now, and I'll also link it in the description.
Sure thing. So I'm over 35, so I don't think I'm allowed on TikTok. But you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Coach Joe Boland. And my goal is to make this whole fitness thing fun, because I really don't think that it has to suck as much as we're led to believe it has to.
That going back to that small changes make big changes, all that good stuff. Well, I appreciate you coming on, taking your time. Like I mentioned before we started recording, there's another guest that I would love to get you in a conversation with that we could, I think we'd all have a good time talking. So if you'd be down to come back for that sometime, I'd love to have you.
That sounds terrific. I'd love to.
Joe, thank you so much for coming on. I had a great conversation, even though it was up and down and everywhere. We didn't even talk about how much weight he had lost. He's lost about 150 pounds. And he said that he stopped weighing himself at about 298 pounds because he never wanted to see that number that started with a 3. That's something I can relate to. Like he mentioned ignorance is bliss. And that's where I was when I went to the doctor and they told me I was pre-diabetic. I never went back because if the doctor doesn't tell me, I'm not diabetic, right? So yeah, Joe has lost about 150 pounds. Congratulations. Way to be a loser, man. That is awesome. Like I said in the beginning, I've got 3 voicemails I'm going to play here. So this first voicemail is from my brother Dougie, and I'll just play it. Thanks for calling in, Doug.
What up, dude? I don't know if I'm your first voicemail or not, but I just listened to today's podcast release. I think it was today's. And you said you hadn't gotten a voicemail yet. So I wanted to leave you a voicemail, loser. Love you, dude.
So thank you for calling in, Doug. Like I said, I really appreciate it. And if anybody is in the Sturgis, Michigan area, go to Designs by Vogts, Vogts, I believe. That's my brother's flower shop. And this is totally a non-biased opinion. He is the best florist in the world. So check him out. He's amazing. This next message comes from Dave from Dumbing It Down with Dave. He's a good friend of mine and he's super supportive, listens to every episode, comments on Spreaker, sends me these messages. Him and I talk all the time. So this one is from Dave. Dave, thank you for calling in.
Hey, Luke, it's Dave from the Dumbing It Down with Dave podcast. I'm sitting here in my truck, driving southbound on the New York State Thruway, listening to your last couple of podcasts. I just listened to It's Okay to Just Be Okay. And I thought that was a very sincere and honest episode, as most, if not all, of your episodes are. And I really related to it. I really got it. And I left a comment there or two. I might leave another one. I'm not really sure. But I wanted to leave you a voice message because I've been neglecting to do that ever since you started the voice messages. And I don't know why. It's not hard to do it. But now that I got your number in my cell, it'll be a little bit easier to type a message and leave a voice message at the same time. So once I've broken the ice, I think I'll do it more often. Now I just have to get to Apple and leave you a 5-star rating and review, take a screenshot of it, and get my sticker. Anyway, great episode, very honest. Yeah, it's okay to be okay. It's okay to be good enough. And when somebody asks you how you're doing, you say okay, and they say just okay. Well, okay is great. Okay is good enough. A lot of people aren't even doing okay. Imagine how they feel. All right, buddy, great job. I'm on to the next episode. Anxiety sucks. Can't wait to hear it. Take care, bye.
Dave, you're the man. If you haven't listened to Dumbing It Down with Dave podcast, it is amazing. He speaks his mind. It's a great show. He's got 300 episodes. He's on all the platforms. Check him out. This third voicemail comes from Dave again after listening to last week's episode, Anxiety Sucks.
Hey, Luke, it's Dave from the Dumbing It Down with Dave podcast. Anyway, seriously, I just listened to the Anxiety Sucks, and I hear you, and I totally relate. I hate being obese. I hate all the limitations that come with being obese, whether they are real or imagined. People say, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm too fat or too heavy." But that's not true. Because you can't do it. But when it's real, when it's really real, you can't fit into something, or something's going to be uncomfortable. A couple of years ago, my wife and I went kayaking on the Hudson River with a group. It was a lot of fun, and I was really looking forward to it. It was great to be in the mighty Hudson River. It's great to be floating on water in a kayak and paddling, and it's just so beautiful on a beautiful day. You wouldn't do it on a bad day anyway. And the people we were with were great. Problem is, somewhere into the trip, my right leg started to fall asleep. Whether or not that has anything to do with being obese, I think it has to do with not being in shape. I think it has to do with a lot of things, and it really made me uncomfortable. I started to panic a little bit. I started getting a little anxious. Somehow I worked it out, and I got across the river, and when we got to where we were, I got out, and I stretched my leg. But it made me nervous, and I said to myself, if you were in shape, if you were exercising, you were eating right, and you weren't obese, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe you wouldn't have drawn that attention to yourself. Because I had to tell somebody, hey, man, my leg's falling asleep. I'm getting uncomfortable. And I don't know how far this can go. Apparently, I'm cutting off the blood circulation to a very important limb. And I didn't want it to become something that it didn't have to be. I wanted to bail ship. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to jump out of the kayak and swim. But my leg was asleep. So anyway, it was a dangerous situation. I related to the roller coaster story, with the ride story that you had about the thing being locked and then unlocked. All right, that's my long voicemail for today. And on to the next Luke Loses episode. Black.
So Dave was talking about the roller coaster story. If you didn't listen to Anxiety Sucks, I got on a roller coaster. I was worried I wouldn't fit. I ended up fitting, but the thing came open and it scared me and I was embarrassed. But yeah, I can relate to all that too. It sucks. It's embarrassing. It's hard. I hate people seeing these things. But yeah, so those are my 3 voicemails that I have. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Sorry, Doug, it took so long to get you on here. Dave, I really appreciate you calling in. You guys are awesome. And like Dave mentioned, go over to Apple Podcasts, leave me a rating and a review, send me a screenshot, and I'll send you a Luke Loses podcast sticker. Don't forget to go over and check out my website. It is www.lukelosespodcast.com. That's got my social media as well as other platforms where you can listen to this podcast. You can also send me an email straight off of the website, or you can call the loser line, which is 323-920-LUKE or 5853, and you will be put on the podcast like Dave and Doug were. You can leave thoughts, tips, topic ideas, concerns, whatever's on your mind. Send it there, call it there, text it there, and I will try to address it. The music that you're hearing right now is by Jake Simmons and the Little Ghost. Check them out. I will post all their information in the description of this episode. If you could, share this episode, share it on your social media, send it to friends, family, whoever you think could benefit from it. I would appreciate it. If you or somebody you know would make a good guest for the show, reach out to me or have them reach out to me. I would love to talk to you guys about coming on for an interview. So I feel like I'm missing something. I'm all over the place, just like the interview. But that is that. As always, stay positive, do the work, trust the process, and I will see you next week.